planet one. Race one, love one, people one. Too many things that's causing one to forget about the main cause.
Hello and welcome back to Evolutionary Entrepreneurs Day 3. This is where we are getting and giving you non-conventional business wisdom from really self-growth leaders and luminaries from all over the world so that you can actually create the impact that you're here to make in 2015. And as many of you know, hundreds of you have already hopped in to support the rainforest. We're doing a rainforest fundraiser here to support the indigenous people of the Amazon. And we just are so grateful for that. And we're excited to meet many of you at the Women's Leadership Summit in March and to have you take advantage of the free gifts that are going to be highlighted as a part of the Rainforest Grab Bag. And we're here today with Stephen Dinan. Hi, Stephen.
Hi, Sage.
It's so good to have you here. I was just so thrilled to get to start the day off with you today. When I saw you on the calendar, I was like, yay, I get some masculine energy. We were with women all day yesterday, and really it's been an incredible couple of days for those of you that have been watching all the videos. We've heard from so many of you that you just loved the exercise Jennifer McLean walked us through yesterday. Thank you so much for your heartfelt comments on the Facebook page. Many of you just absolutely had your worlds rocked by Neale Donald Walsch. If you haven't watched those replays, they will be posted through the weekend, so be sure to hop in and have a look at those. And we've just been hearing from so many of you that this has been like hitting a reset button on your big why, like you're thinking bigger. And that's why I couldn't be happier to be kicking off today, which is all about evolutionary strategy with Stephen Dinan of the Shift Network, because today we're going to be giving you ideas to really implement this expansion that we've been on together throughout the last couple of days. And there's nobody better suited to help me do this with you, really, and kick this day off than Stephen. If you're ready to really rock some strategy that's authentic and reach a lot more people, Stephen Dinan of the Shift Network is just like, for me, when I start thinking small, Stephen, I just think of that time that we had dinner in Ashland after the Evolutionary Leaders meeting, and I just kept being like, oh my gosh, like with every piece of strategy you were telling me about how you put the Shift Network together and how you work with your 30+ employees and how you have multiple summits going on at the same time. It just, blew my mind open in terms of like, oh, like that's what it really means to step into being a movement leader. And for those of you that don't know Stephen, he is the CEO of the Shift Network. He also has worked extensively with IONS, the Institute of Noetic Sciences. He's an author of The Radical Spirit, The New World Library, and forthcoming book, Sacred America, Sacred World. Stephen helped to create the Esalen Institute's Center of Theory and Research. Stephen absolutely is just like such a visionary on the planet. He's doing such good work. And when he heard this event was a fundraiser, he hopped in immediately. And that just tells me so much about your heart, Stephen. As you guys are listening to Stephen today, see if you can just like get inside his head and get in his energy field and feel into the way he thinks. Because if you really want to reach a lot more people, Stephen's the person to pay attention to in the world. Stephen, thanks again so much for taking the time. I know how busy your schedule is.
No, thank you. And I hope I can live up to even half that introduction.
You don't have to. We'll just take you off the hook right now.
That's good.
So, where I'd like to start is just this question that I've been asking everybody, which is, we're at this moment in evolutionary history, right? Like, there's more that's possible than ever before. And with the internet and with the way that we see people manifesting, it's like we kind of want it all right now, like bigger, better, faster, stronger. Like instant manifestation of everything, I think is like almost an epidemic. And at the same time, it's unsustainable. And we're also carrying the weight of a lot of the world's struggles, the homelessness, the hunger, the epidemics, the climate change crisis. How do we build a business in 2015? I know it's a big question, just while honoring both.
Well, I think that we have to really hold both of the big picture and the smaller steps at the same time. The first time I tried to launch what became the Shift Network was in 2000. I got a very big picture download, whole planetary activation, web, multimedia, local centers. It was very full spectrum, and we probably only built 3% of what that original vision was. And at the time, I didn't really have a background in business. And so I assumed, oh, well, this divine download, it's only going to take 3, 4, maybe 5 years. And sure enough, I had one attempted launch failure, and then I had to kind of back into working for Ions and do another version of Shift in Action, and grew that to $1 million or so revenue a year, but then had to let that go, and Ions no longer wanted to do that. So 10 years later, I was still back to square one in certain ways, although I built a lot of skills and talents and capacities to grow this larger network. So I think the first thing that really taught me is tenacity is really required. And if you really are committed for the long haul, like I said in myself recently, I was like, I want to do what I'm doing until 2050, until I'm 80 years old. And so, and that actually, it shifts the framework. I even put in a marker in the ground of like an intention to live to 100. Since so many of the pressures around us are always focused shorter and shorter term, and what can happen with that is if more of our consciousness is focused on just what we can do in the next week or next 2 months or next 3 months or even a year, we know intuitively that there's only so much that can happen in that time span. And so we tend to shrink our vision to match the time scale that we're thinking into. So when we do really big visioning with the Shift Network now, we are thinking about what legacy do we want to leave in 2050? What can this be by 2050? And that's a long time to be thinking about. And I think that's actually what's required now on a planetary scale, is that for us to move not to 7 generations, which would be 150 years, that's a big leap from where we are, but beyond quarterly or even 4-year cycles, where we tend to think of presidential cycles or it's like getting in and getting out, and what's your exit strategy in a business, because to really build something that endures and creates the kind of deep systemic changes that we need to see, it takes a long-term commitment. And so I think when we create space to allow that blossoming of the long-term commitment, I think that what that does is it kind of reinvigorates us, because it sets a wider context and a bigger possibility. Because a lot of times the day-to-day operational responsibilities and making payroll and all that, it can kind of keep compressing our field. And I can feel in myself as things get bigger, there's more conservatism that sets in, because you're like, oh, I have to protect what we've already built. And so then I have to be more conscious of the disciplines of expansion to really keep the fullness of the vision. And so I do that in a number of different ways. Some of it is just taking time to vision big and create an atmosphere where that's encouraged. I just decided with my coach today to budget the last hour of each day as sort of my incentive to do big sky visioning that isn't tethered to any immediate revenue goals or even this year, because it actually feeds me. And so to have some time that you budget in your schedule to do that. Or the other option, I try to do a Shabbat or a Sabbath every week. I'm not Jewish, but I think the practice itself is really important, of like moving out of the doing mode into the being mode. And I find a lot of my bigger picture visions and possibilities emerge in those downtimes, and to really accept and bless that, and to recognize that if we don't design each day with our own expansive cycles in there, then we can get more and more compressed around our horizons. So morning meditation for me is really important to kind of open my consciousness possibilities, and then structuring your day so that you actually take the time to do the things that require that bigger picture visioning and possibility in the times when you're most expanded. So I try to do some of my core writing right after I meditate. And so the core writing is like setting in a way tracks for the future to be laid down. And so I feel like all of us have to do this balance now of really being committed to big picture changes on planet Earth. We were just watching a presentation this week as a management team from somebody who's been working on what he calls Heaven on Earth presentation. And he's done this in corporations and with all these different political groups, Prince Edward Island, individuals, and really taking that as sort of the higher mission of creating heaven on earth, or co-creating heaven on earth, and not as an imposition of a religious ideal, but really as a felt experiential reality that we co-create together. And I think that's the kind of scale at which we need to look at things, that we are able to create this larger possibility for the planet in our lifetimes. Maybe all of it may not be done by 2050, but we can do a lot, and we can turn a lot more around. And so when you take it away from the kind of immediate short term, it allows this blossoming of possibilities, and then you can true yourself with your mission and your higher purpose, because you don't feel like, oh, I can't have that higher purpose or that mission because I can't do that in the next 6-10 years. It's like, but give me 40 years and maybe you can do it. And so that informs things, and actually I think relaxes some of the pressure in the moment, because the big picture systemic challenges we face it's like a slow turning ship. We just have to keep nudging the ship. But if you think about it in terms of percentages, if we make a 2% improvement every year between now and 2050, we will have completely turned the ship around. Just 2% a year. So 2% in any one realm is not a big deal. 2% decrease in violence in the world, 2% decrease in violence against women, 2% decrease in carbon output, 2% improvement in, it's like all these areas, like that's very doable. And so if we're just aligning things and realizing that it's really important that our businesses reflect the world that we want to create. That's where a lot of people get hung up, is they get so impatient to get out the word or the message that they'll be putting out great stuff in the world, but then they're miserable because they're overworking, their staff is all stressed out. There's a lot of new paradigm organizations that are not actually that high functioning behind the scenes. And so if we're noticing that in ourselves, I went through cycles of burnout where I started working 70-hour work weeks and I just soured. And I realized I had to personally make a public commitment of 45-hour maximum work weeks for 4 months. And that kind of reined in that tendency and forced me to just focus on the things that were most important, and then to do the things that were really feeding my body and soul in a deeper way. And
I love what you're saying. It's nourishing me so much, because it counters some of what the internet does, which is like more, bigger, faster, global, worldwide. And it's like, because we know that's there, I think it's almost an illusion. And I think it can get us off track around sustainable growth. There's this saying that I teach my clients, which is, we constantly overestimate what we can get done in a year, but we underestimate what we can get done in 5 years. And for those of you guys, even those of you guys that are starting out, I really want you to pay attention to what Stephen's saying around just that piece of, like, if you're in this, if you're committed, even if your message changes a little bit, even if you evolve, right? The whole point of this series is that this is an evolutionary business. You're building a business that can evolve with you as the planet evolves, and in turn, building a business that will help evolve the planet in a positive direction. And that as you put the stake in the ground for committing to doing this long term, whatever it takes, even if it evolves, you can free yourself up from that burnout and that stress that I think we all fall into with this urgency of the internet.
Right. And I think that, what happens is a lot of the different problems we face, the people who are championing addressing those problems often interject more urgency than sometimes is required, because of the fear that the world isn't listening. And so then there kind of gets this kind of amplified, like, fear energy. And fear can be motivating short term, but it tends to be corrosive long term. So for the long term energy, it's more like running a marathon. You want the positive vision. You want to feel good. You want to sort of be contributing, because if the fear is going to kind of lose its push at a certain point. And so there's this whole thing Michael Beckwith says, we're pushed by the pain of the past until we're drawn by the vision of the future, something along those lines. And so there's this pull of the potential future, and then the push from the pain or the suffering of the moment. And we don't want to define ourselves by what we're against or what we're solving, but what we're aspiring towards, without ignoring the problems in the moment. We have to kind of open to those. So it's this dance between expanding into the future, dealing with the current reality, and being willing to have time and spaces in which you take off the hat of what if, or having to operationalize it, or where's the money going to come from. And I get this all the time. I'll give you another example. It doesn't always just happen in business, but it kind of relates to business. I was just in the Yucatan, and we connected with this Mayan elder who I just was blown away by, just an incredible love being. And he's had a vision for turning this ranch that he owns into this huge center for the Mayan rebirth of culture and trainings and university. And then I was at another friend has a retreat, it's a hotel, a boutique hotel in Tulum, and then I said, oh, we could do something where you create the Maya certificate, that then it's like 10% of the proceeds of the profits go to this Mayan rebirth, and then you replicate that with other boutique hotels and become something that propagates up the coast. And anyway, so we started all these different things, and part of the fun with that is like I wasn't taking operational responsibility. Because I was like, oh, I could expand, I could do what I do and expand. So that can sometimes be a way to exercise that muscle in us Because if we feel like we've got a lot of responsibilities, it can feel stressful to add on a bigger vision because you're like, whoa, I'm having trouble with the vision I've got. But if you do it with somebody else, you could almost partner up with somebody and say, okay, I'm going to listen to you. It's like, how can I expand your vision for what you could do, Sage, and how could you do the same thing for me? That way we're kind of helping each other expand beyond whatever perceived limitations we've created in our vision for ourselves.
I love that, and it's an assignment that I actually do give in my Entrepreneurial Leadership Academy, to go do visioning with each other and think as big as you can possibly dream and pull the vision out of each other, because it satisfies that one in us that wants to have 5 visions at once. Like, you know, it's like, for those of us that are evolutionary leaders, we're visionary leaders, this is our best, we get addicted to this phase, you know, we get addicted to the idea phase. And once we get in the operations of actually running a business, this visionary in us can start to feel littler and squashed. And so it's like, we have to have an outlet for that in our lives. And speaking of really tending to that vision, Stephen, for those of us on the line and watching the replay and live with us right now, and by the way, for those of you guys that are with us, I recommend using the Facebook as a note-taking guide, right? So click on the Facebook thread below if you haven't already. Introduce yourself, keep posting, and when Stephen says something that's just like totally brilliant, jot it down, and that way if you miss it, you can go back and get it from somebody else. And let's just keep track of our ideas there and share your visions there so we can keep getting to know each other. I know you guys already are, you know, really diving into this tribe because we've been together 3 days, but let's keep that going. And Stephen, I'm wondering, in the spirit of everyone's vision, everybody here has a big vision, and for some of us we have several visions. What is, like, where do we start? Like, what's the #1 strategy to go from where we are if we're just starting out? A lot of the folks listening are just starting out and watching, and, you know, really get to where you are. Like, can you give us like the first few steps? Because we don't want to overwhelm people, but, you know, you've built this organization that's reaching hundreds of thousands of people.
So I often think that the best place to start is to really look at what's the highest value thing you can offer to the greatest number of people at the lowest cost. And that's the best way to start. And then because I'll give you an example of how that worked for us, is that once I got really clear after these 2 other phases in which the larger vision didn't birth, or at least partially birth, but didn't end up kind of being the final form, I really meditated first on right timing. I think you have to be in right timing. It's good to give yourself financially, to give yourself some ramp and give yourself a little longer than you think, because if you start feeling like you can't make rent, it can sour a lot of your businesses and the fun of it too. So as long as a ramp as you can between savings, you know, credit lines, whatever it takes, having an ally, investors. But then you really, I tuned in about right timing, and then once I got the right timing, I really said, well, what should we launch with? And it came to launch 40 days with 40 spiritual leaders from every major lineage. So we created this amazing global thing. I interviewed from Sufis to Zen Roshis to Hindu gurus to Christian.
I remember when you did that. I remember that very first 40-day program. I tuned into a couple of them. I was like, who is this guy?
Yeah, and so what it did is there wasn't any business model at that point, except that I knew more or less about, you know, how to launch courses and trainings and programs, and so I did have that on the radar that we were going to do that, but I made that first offering a real love offering to the world in many ways. It didn't cost a huge amount of money. Maybe I think I had $15,000 in the bank that I could coast on from some of my expenses. I had another $15,000 for investing, investing in the business. Maybe it cost me $10,000, maybe $7,000 or $8,000 to do the series, and maybe another 7 or 8 on my side. But what it did is that, like, because it was really coming from the heart, it was really aligned, and it was really something people hadn't seen before at that point. I got a lot of people to do that series who were not internet marketers or not web savvy at all, and there's this huge upswell of interest. So it went very viral. It was one of the most viral things we've ever done. We had 30,000 people sign up. And so I went from having 0 in the database to having 30,000 people in the database. So when we did our first course, you know, we made $75,000 on that, able to pay back, you know, and pay the faculty, pay everything out. And basically we were kind of in the black by month 4, you know, with no outside investment. And so, but the principle is, it's like, what can you leverage that you do that can bring the greatest benefit to the largest number of people quickly, and easily at a low cost, and to use that as your kind of lead into a market. And then that's kind of what you're doing with evolutionary entrepreneurs. And you're doing a nice thing here, which is great. You're comparing it with a philanthropic commitment. So evolutionary entrepreneurship is a great brand, and it's like you can build from that, and you're leading with generosity. People trust it, the people getting on board, and you could build a great evolutionary entrepreneurs training on the back end and make money on it. So it's not like it's either or. It's like there's a pairing of the philanthropic motive and the for-profit motive, which is actually necessary, and I think on the deepest level reflects the wholeness of who we are. Because if you think about it, like anything from a bacteria to an animal to, it's like you have to have thriving on the individual level, then you have to have thriving on the societal level, and then thriving in the kind of larger ecosystem. And so, we've kind of created these artificial constructs. For-profits are all about self-interest, supposedly. Non-profits are all about collective interest, but then that creates dysfunctions. And really, it's both is true of who we are. And so the more you can weave your philanthropic motive and your profit motive together, the more synergy gets created. So I think that, really tuning in about how can you leverage your gifts. It doesn't have to take the form of a big teleseries or telesummit. It could be essentializing your most important points in a little mini ebook, and you just get it up on one page, and you start sending it out to friends, encouraging them to get to other friends, and and then you're building an email list, and you're gifting them with content. So in any relationship, it takes a while to build trust. So people who don't know you, it takes a while to trust you. So they're sussing you out for a while. Is this person just manipulative? Are they truthful? Are they honest? So if you're starting with a stance of generosity and really giving some of your best value up front, then that builds a relationship of trust that then is the foundation for your later business.
I love what you're saying, because you're speaking to two really key things that I believe as well, and that is that, one, if you're just getting started, start in generosity. Set yourself up financially so that you can start from a place of generosity and giving, and build relationships with people from that place. I so strongly want to underline that for all of you. And number two, to use your relationships. Don't be afraid to make relationships, and then use your relationships to help you build your business. And it's interesting that today, on the Evolutionary Strategy day, we have you, Stephen, and then we have me. I'm going to be talking about the art of selling and the art of building a list. And then we have Ocean, who's built, 100,000 person list with the Food Revolution Network. And all of us have used the summit model, where we bring speakers together to speak on a common topic. And these kinds of models do work. And one of the reasons Stephen's are working so well with the Shift Network, and Ocean's are working so well, and mine are working so well, is that we keep putting a new spin on what we're doing. We're putting a lot of our passion and our love and our desire to change the world into what we're doing. And so if you are going to do some sort of a multi-speaker event where the speakers promote, like we're doing with Evolutionary Entrepreneurs, it's just occurring to me to really infuse it with what you're talking about, that passion, like you were drawn, like you were motivated, that you had this idea, you had this download, 40 spiritual teachers, 40 days, and that stood out for you, and that's how you wanted to do it. And I really just encourage you each to find that thread for yourself. And Stephen, so then what's next?
Yeah, well, I just want to dovetail on that. One thing that I didn't mention is it's good to, even before you launch your business, to be building favors through generosity with people. So that's a part I probably didn't mention, and it's true for you and Ocean as well, is that like make a point of trying to be generous and helpful to people over time. And then there's a certain point when you do a launch and want to do something bigger, then all of those people will kind of tend to be more on board with helping you. So that what often happens is people will try to put the ask before the generosity, like in terms of like, you get a little more visible, and people are like, hey, can you mail for this? Can you do this? Can you do this? But it's like, oftentimes when you're in that, once you become more visible, then you have a lot more requests coming at you. And then you're grateful that like, oh, this person's just saying, how can I help here? How can I do that? And that those relationships tend to kind of become more solid, and then something that you can build with over time. And I think that it also lends itself to a certain personality type as more of kind of an aggregator or host. But I think you can do similar things in any particular vertical. If your expertise is like on a diagnostic, like let's say evolutionary entrepreneur, let's say you're really good at marrying Enneagram type and evolutionary strategy, right? So you're like, okay, are you an evolutionary entrepreneur? Take this Enneagram test that's tailored to evolutionary entrepreneurs and learn your strategy and where your growing points are and not, right? And so then it's like you've got a little diagnostic or a handout that you can self-assess, and you're providing value to people because you're marrying your Enneagram with a specific target market. So I think the principle doesn't have to be you just aggregate a bunch of speakers, but you're really saying where's the value that I can add, and then how does that help also advance the work of other people? Because it can be through an affiliate program, but oftentimes it's helpful to have them involved in some way. So you can do bonus gifts. It's like get this program, and then you're going to get some bonus gifts from these others. So that's the principle, is creating synergy and building upon basically networks of generosity. I'll give you an example like. Marianne Williamson, the first time she was going to run for Congress, she never went public with it, but came close. Like I put in a bunch of hours into her campaign, and and I really helped her out, and she really trusted me, and I didn't ask anything in return. And then when I launched Shift, it's like she was one of my first people that I asked to be in the 40 Days of 40 Spiritual Leaders. And then I was like, okay, anyone else I go to, do you want to be in this series featuring Marianne Williamson and yada yada? So I had built. It was easy for her to say, yes, sure, I'll do an hour on the phone with you, after I had put in, 50 hours into her campaign or something like that. And so it was just a give back from her heart to mine, and it opened the door to a lot of other people.
Absolutely. I love what you just said. Synergize the networks of generosity. Synergize the networks of generosity. You say so much in any one sentence. I just really want to highlight how rich your way of thinking is. Can you say a little bit more about?
Footnote that part of what you do that's really great is that one of the things that you can do with people is just mirror back to them authentic praise, mirroring positive feedback, because that also stokes the cycle. You're generous with your praise and your appreciation, and that creates rapport too. And so that's a way you can gift people, even if you don't have a list, even if you don't have other things. It's just like, here's what I see in you, and I really feel blessed by that. And that's a way to kind of like deepen all this network of relationships. And I think it's really important to do that in the space that you're in, and not to see those people as your competitors, but as George Kao calls them niche mates, which I love the term. It's like your niche mates, and if you really build rapport, then you can actually create more synergy and better business from collaborating with your niche mates, who we used to think of as competitors, than if we just try to ignore them or create distance with them.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And in that spirit of evolution, if we are all evolving at the pace that we know to be true, I can't remember how many millions of people are going to be online, within the next 5 years, but it's like tens of millions. I mean, it's just, there's 5 million websites on now. I think it's supposed to triple in the next 5 years, right? So it's like there is enough for all of us. When we get into that scarcity, and I think it's so common to say, well, somebody else is doing it better. Oh, I had this idea, but somebody else is already doing it. Can I do it too? It's like if somebody else is doing it, that's the reason to do it. Because if they're doing it and they're doing well at it, then it means it works, and there's going to be people that can hear your message through you that wouldn't be able to hear it through anybody else. And you do that so well with the Shift Network. You've brought together so many people and enrolled so many people in your vision, Stephen, in such a sustainable way. It's just an absolute model for the industry.
Yeah, well, I think one thing that you're kind of pointing to is that it's like, at a certain stage, you're also thinking, like, to start to grow the business, you start thinking, how can I advance the mission of all these other people around me? And so, or that you want to work with or want to play with. I mean, that can apply to customers. It can also apply to allies. And so it's like, having a structure where you're like, oh, I can help this person in that way. I can help this person in that way. And not necessarily always quid pro quo or tit for tat, because it doesn't actually feel as good if it's like, okay, well, I'll do this if you do that. But you're like, no, I'm going to help you out here. I'm going to do this here. And and it circles back around as long as you don't kind of get into a burnout mode where we're just giving. There's like a little bit of a pathology in that where you have to also nourish yourself and charge for your services and do things that are high value. And so there's this kind of balance between the giving and then also owning your value of what you're providing. And so anyway, I think that I kind of lost the train of thought there, but we'll just go back to where you were.
Can you say more about the balance of giving and then honoring your value? Because I think this relationship with money is part of the path of an evolutionary business owner. You know, it's like we are evolving in all areas of our life, including our relationship with money. And as we step into wanting to give something from our hearts and charge for it, I think sometimes it can be a confusing path, right? Because it's like, this is something we'd probably do whether we made money or not, but yet we have to make money. So can you speak to that?
I found it useful to expand in both directions. It's good to do it at the same time. So on the same time, being more generous philanthropically as you're being willing to charge more money for what you do, and it actually in some ways is you want to expand the range. So last year I think we gave about $75,000 as a company to charity, and we want to increase that this year. It's like we're getting kind of more and more legs. And, you know, it's like at a certain point I was doing individual, we were going to be running low one month. I needed to add something. I was like, okay, I'll do some individual sessions. But I really looked at it, I was like, I have to charge about $1,000 an hour for it to be worthwhile for the company to have me focused on doing individual sessions. And I had some real resistance to that because I was just like, geez, you know, it's like I used to judge the people who would charge that kind of money as like, what are you, it's like robber baron or something. And then when I really did it, you know, first of all, I got that I needed to get through that threshold. And then I got that, you know, with the people I worked with, I would say all but one got a really strong ROI. And that person was but they needed a little something differently. I ended up giving her half a refund because she needed something a little different than I was offering. But the rest of them, I was like, yeah, they definitely got more than that value for the coaching time that I provided. And so it's like, I can offer some high value coaching. So I had to kind of expand my sense of like, kind of gulp, you know, to charge $1,000 an hour. And that level is going to be different for everybody. It might be 75, it might be 150, 250. To get comfortable charging more for your time is like an act of self-valuing what you can really deliver, and to really be honest about, are you delivering the value that you is the person getting that much benefit from it, or is it just an ego trip?
Yeah.
And on the other side is like expand how much you're willing to give. And sometimes you're like, you know, being able to say, I can charge $1,000 for this, and I'm going to charge nothing for this because this just feels important to do. So at the same time, you're kind of expanding your range of philanthropic range and charging range. In a way, they're almost like the masculine and feminine polarity within money. It's like the feminine tends to want to move towards the generosity, inclusiveness. Masculine tends to want to stand in the power and the strength and to charge more and make more money. And so if you're kind of expanding on both sides at the same time, then you open up a fuller spectrum of yourself. And that's actually required if you're going to be a leader to build an organization, because you have to stop thinking just about what do I need to make for my livelihood and vacations and house and everything. You have to start thinking, well, how do I, you know, we're adding 401k plans, and you have matching grants from the company. And it's just like, you add 5% match, and it's like, wow, that's another, you know, 100, I don't know what it is, $100,000 a year. And it's like, you have to start thinking about, how do I provide for all these other people and strategically do that. And so you have to start thinking much bigger numbers if you're going to play a bigger game, which means you got to get comfortable charging more for your time or more for your products at the same time as you're being more generous.
I love what you said, and I've done the same thing, and I think it's one of the reasons we've grown so quickly. We've tripled every year. We keep giving back. And I find that, especially as heart-centered entrepreneurs, we sort of top out at a certain income level, or like a way of thinking about money, unless we make our vision even bigger than our own company. Which is right. Like, okay, so if I were to be able to give back to the world in whatever kind of a way that I wanted to, you know, where would I want to give back? And to include that from the beginning, rather than saying, when I get to making $10,000 a month, then I'll give 10% to charity. It's like, I flip it on its head and say, no, it's not the amount that matters so much, right? It's not the quantity that matters, it's the quality that matters. And I love what you're saying, because you're using that as a part of the mindset to actually grow your abundance consciousness, to give back from the beginning.
Right. Yeah, and it requires also working with places of trust because a lot of us have inherited paradigms of money that are very mistrustful. There's a lot of fear that we're not going to be looked after, not going to be provided for, and so I think I'm not of the school that you just transcend and ignore fears. I think it's important to take them seriously. They're almost like part of our wisdom council, but we don't necessarily put them in charge. You don't put the fears in charge, but you want to really listen to what they have to say. Do I need to adjust something there? Do I have to, be a little, and for me, like I was more counterphobic for a long term, and that almost capsized the company because I would kind of go like, well, I don't want to be afraid of that. And so I'd go for these big visions and then almost run out of cash. Now I'm like, okay, well, the conservative voice of like, let's make sure we have some cash reserves before we do X, Y, or Z actually is good. So there's this sort of balancing act that we're always doing as entrepreneurs, is noticing our own patterns and where we get sticky and where we have our hangups, and then kind of subtly training ourselves to embrace something that's the opposite. So it might be that one entrepreneur is like, oh, they're really good at the generosity side, but they really need to be able to charge for their services, and so they default out of fear for charging for their services to just more generous, and then they wonder why their business isn't working. There's other people who are kind of more afraid that if they don't keep everything for themselves, then they're going to run out, and then that can create a tighter energy, and people don't want to work there because at a certain point, you're also not thinking about just what you're creating for yourself, but you have to create an environment that's super magnetic and juicy and alive and exciting for people to be a part of. And so that, it's interesting, like this when we said that when we rolled out certain, I did a Ebola campaign.
I remember, we raised,
and it just that, we put $10,000 into it. I put some time and energy, raised another $55,000 from other people, and just kind of got some good momentum and sent it out to our list. And the effect on our staff was really important because people just felt so much more proud to work here, proud of who we are, what we're stand for in the world. And I feel like there's such a high level of loyalty now that $10,000 probably will come back in the form of like not needing to rehire somebody who sticks around because they just feel like, wow, this is the best place I've ever worked. So the cycles of generosity also just make people feel better about being part of something, which includes staff, includes alliance partners, and it includes customers as well. So customers are excited to read about that or see that. So just you doing this series and making the Rainforest Give Back really central to that. It's like people get excited to be part of what you're creating, your movement of evolutionary entrepreneurs.
Yeah, so be thinking about what is the cycle of generosity that you next want to enforce in your business, right? And how do you shore yourself up so that you have the resources to be able to be generous in the ways that you want to be generous. And I really want to underline what you said, Stephen, which is that when you step into charging more, because I know many of you are here and you're wanting to charge more for your services, and when you step into charging more, to be more generous. If you're stepping into charging a premium rate for your mentorship services, to be more generous, to be more available to your clients. I just hopped off the phone with a client last night, and it was late at night, and she's in the middle of a launch, and she's like, oh my God, I can't believe you're on the phone with me at 9 o'clock at night. And I'm like, I'm a high-level coach. You deserve this kind of treatment from somebody who is absolutely up underneath you, and I want to give more to my clients that are paying me at that level, and it feels so good then, to step into, like you stepped into, Stephen, with charging more for your private time. And so, what can you actually add into that hour with a client, or that package with a client, that 6-month program, what can you add in that makes you go, oh yeah, it's worth $500 a month, or it's worth $1,000 a month, and to stop getting tripped up in, can I really charge that much? And ask, if you were on the receiving end of that, what would you want to be given if you were investing at that level? And then it becomes an equal energy exchange, and you can lose a lot of the over-analysis around what you're charging.
Right. Great.
I know we only have a few minutes left, and I just want to ask you to leave our audience and leave our listeners with, what do you wish you had known when you first got started?
It's a good question. I would say one of the things is just be just cautious in hiring. Is it that's really making sure people are a good fit, not just for a function, but for the mission that you're about. So, and the culture as well. So like we made not a lot, but some hiring mistakes early on that like were really painful.
I have too.
And really painful. And so I was like, wow, that's just because you're trying to create a conscious business and evolution doesn't mean everybody's fully bought into that or that they're capable of operating in the way that you want to. And so I feel like we've gotten way more rigorous on the hiring process, and that has, we haven't had any problem at all in like at least a year and a half with anybody. Like it's been very clean. And like that really makes so much of a difference as you're growing a business.
And I'm gonna have you back up from the screen just a little bit so we can see all of you. I don't want anybody to miss anything.
Okay, so I'd say that's a key thing. I think the building in the self-care rhythms from week one, because there's a tendency to push things off into the future. That includes daily self-care, whether that's meditation practice, yoga. Time with your sweetie, weekly rhythms. I think having some sort of daily restorative rhythm, some sort of weekly restorative rhythm. I like a Sabbath. You can do full weekends. I'm pretty solid with full weekends now. And so you're really designing that in from the beginning. So you're not pushing out into the future. Once we reach profitability or once we do X, Y, and Z, because what happens is you start to undermine your well-being as you're going. And then that can create, when you're in that depleted state, that can create more urgency, which is actually tends to be repellent to people, to the right people or partners. And so if you're in a state of urgency, there's a little desperation in it, and that will be repellent. So it's like building your internal reserves, your energetic reserves, that the care of yourself as an entrepreneur is just as central to the growth of your business as any other aspect. And so to set whatever feels like reasonable working hours for you and stick to them. And sometimes that means not getting things done, pushing out a week, spending a little longer, and kind of things ramping up. But it will do is just create a deeper, a more sustainable psychology for the long haul. And you really want to be thinking long haul.
I love that.
But 3, I would just say, is like I started off with too short of horizons, which created stress. And actually the whole 2050 thing, for me, that like I had some urgency around, okay, we got to get to this certain level to help change the world in time. And it's just like, and there's truth in that. But when it's coming from that kind of like hard pushing energy, it can also push away that exactly the resources you need. So you have to have this combination of really putting your full energy towards your vision while also really listening and really sensing into what's arriving, what's not arriving, what's the deeper rhythm. Because most of us are not necessarily masterful at sensing what's the right rhythm of things. And you have to do a lot of listening for the feedback of when something's moving too fast, something's moving too slow. There's a entrepreneur that I really respect a lot, actually an investor, I won't name him, but he said the most important spiritual practice of an entrepreneur is not leaning too far in and not leaning too far back. And so this optimal leaning, it's like how much are you pushing things forward? I think a little bit of push is good, but if it's not balanced with the relaxed, open spaciousness, you kind of push, relax. It's sort of like foot on the accelerator, foot on the brake. So this kind of feathering of growth, and like we've kind of settled it. I know you're tripling every year. That's very impressive. That for me feels at this stage like an unsustainable level of growth.
It wouldn't be sustainable for me to keep that up. Absolutely not. Yeah, no.
So we've kind of settled into, last year we grew about 50% over the last year revenue-wise and staffing. And I've just said, you know what? It's like, that's totally great. If we just keep that up, so not trying to like set goals or targets that are too ambitious.
Yep.
And then creating a sense of failure around it. Because like the first couple of years we're setting this audacious milestones and we'd always miss them.
Right.
And that's demoralizing versus having months where we exceed our budget regularly. So probably last year I think we probably exceeded our budget on 8 out of 12 months, maybe even 10. And so we ran solidly in the black all year. So try to design, getting to profitability early, so there's less dependence on investors because there's a lot of variability in that. I'd say the other thing that I really learned is just like building a cash reserve as early can really helps psychologically, because then you're moved out of survival mode into thinking longer term and strategic, and you can weather little ups and downs.
Yes.
And if you don't have any cash reserve, and you have it down, then your whole consciousness gets absorbed in that, and lose some of the juice and energy that make your business attractive.
I could not agree more. I think that is just one of the biggest things, is to have that cash reserve as soon as possible. Like, start yourself off with 3 months of living expenses. You know, what do you need in the bank to know no matter what happened, you have 3 months tucked away, and don't touch it. Like, once you move it into another account, don't touch it. And I love what you're saying, Stephen, about just getting really clear on, like, what's your time to work and what's your time to play, and just be a woman or a man or an evolutionary light worker in the world. Some of you were chatting me up on Facebook yesterday, and I was telling you that I actually work the first 3 weeks of the month, and I take the 4th week of the month completely off, and my team knows it, and my clients know it, and I can go full on, because I know myself, I love to just go full on. I'm like you, Stephen. I'll dive straight in, and if I don't have an island of time waiting for me at some point, you know, a couple months in, I'll start feeling my vital life force energy being sucked out of me. So, you know, whatever you do to set your schedule up the way you want it, like, stick to it, make it consistent. For me, taking the 4th week of the month off really works. I can do all my client calls the first 3 weeks of the month, and the 4th week of the month I kick it. And this month I took last week off because, as you know, this is the 4th week of the month. So, Stephen, it has been an absolute joy to have you. Thank you so much for leaving us with those words of sustainable growth, and what it really means to, like, buoy yourself up with your cash reserve, and then that willingness to give back to the world, so that you don't just grow unilaterally. You know, you're growing in both sides. If every single one of us could go out and just implement some of those pieces, all of our businesses would be, I think, a lot more impactful in 2015.
And thank you for being a living example of almost everything I was sharing.
You are giving those of us who are hopping in to the Evolutionary Grab Bag access to 4 essential key trainings that you did last year. I think George Kao, Mari Smith, Mark Silver. It's the Enlightened Business Essentials. Can you say a little bit more about these 4 trainings? Yeah,
basically every year we've been doing an Enlightened Business Summit. We bring together the leading pioneers who really marry this deep spiritual wisdom and practical business success. And so we took 4 of the trainings that are most applicable to evolutionary entrepreneurs, one from Tim Kelly, one from George Kao, one from Mari Smith, and one from Mark Silver, put them all together and created this Enlightened Business Toolkit for you. So it's our gift to you when you make a donation to support the rainforest work and really help us all create a better world.
Well, that's going to be awesome. And you know what? I'm going to throw in the interview that you did with me on the art of enrollment, so that you guys can really understand my viewpoint on
all right, that's the spirit.
What it means to have enrollment conversations with people from a really authentic and evolutionary place. And you'll get access to that gift, again, when you donate to the rainforest. If you haven't already given, it's just $25 to the rainforest. And remember that $25 goes to help indigenous people preserve their culture, keep the oil companies out of the rainforest, provide healthy births to the Achuar people in Ecuador. It's just $25. You get access to free trainings from all our speakers, including 2 tickets to the Women's Leadership Summit in March. We are going to be back in just a moment with yours truly. I'm going to be bringing in my incredible sidekick, Rebecca Snowball, to interview me about the art of selling and how your services can, in fact, be your art for the world, and why you want to embrace selling now from an evolutionary and totally integrous perspective, so that we can get your message out into the world in a bigger way in 2015. And again, thank you so much, Stephen. I know how busy your schedule is, and it's just been an absolute honor to be with you today. I've been taking notes in my head, and I can't wait to go back through this interview and jot down a few of the things that I missed, because I've just been hanging on your every word. The folks on the Facebook page are loving it. Don't go anywhere, you guys. We'll be back in just a minute with my next hostess with the mostest. And Stephen, thank you so much.
Thank you all. Rock your businesses, and thank you, Sage.
Bye. Be back in just a minute, everyone.